Imagine witnessing an empire-crushing miracle. Imagine watching an entire sea literally split in two just to guarantee your survival.
Right, something completely unforgettable.
Exactly. Only for your children to grow up and completely forget it ever happened.
Yeah.
I mean, today we are looking at how an entire nation managed to delete its own cultural memory in a single generation.
And really what happens when a society just replaces its foundational identity with whatever is most convenient at the time.
It is wild.
Ugh.
But before we step into all that chaos, I want to take a moment to pray that God blesses your day, and really that God blesses your entire week ahead as you join me for this conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Because we are diving into a massive turning point in ancient history today. We're using some incredibly rich sources to guide us on this deep dive, specifically the study notes from the Holman and NAA study Bibles, focusing on the second chapter of the book of Judges.
And we also have this really detailed historical map of the era that we're going to be pulling from.
All right, the map is super helpful. And I want to be clear for you listening, we are not just looking at a dry list of dates here. We're really unpacking a masterclass in human psychology.
Oh, for sure. It's all about that uncomfortable tension between divine grace, human compromise, and ultimate consequences.
Yeah, that tension.
That tension is basically the defining characteristic of this whole era, what historians and theologians refer to as the vicious cycle of the ancient Israelites. I mean, it is a profound case study in societal collapse.
It really is.
We are looking at a people who had a very specific covenant, a literal treaty with the divine, and we get to watch the structural integrity of that treaty just, dissolve in real time.
So to understand how a nation loses its way so thoroughly, we really have to start by looking at the exact moment the alarm was sounded, right?
Right, the inciting incident, basically.
Yeah. The sources open with this super striking scene, a divine confrontation. A figure identified as the angel of the Lord moves from a place called Gilgal to a place called Bochim.
And the geography here is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Oh, definitely. Gilgal isn't just some random spot on the map. It was their original base camp when they first entered the land.
Right. It was a site of massive triumph.
Exactly. It's where they celebrated their first Passover in freedom. So moving from Gilgal to Bochim, it represents this brutal shift from a location of national victory to, a location of national failure.
Yeah, and the Holman study notes provide some really essential context for this messenger, too.
Okay, lay it on us.
So this isn't just a prophet or like a standard angelic envoy. The notes explain that this figure actually represents God himself, delivering a direct, uncompromising indictment.
Wow. Okay, so no middleman.
Right, no middleman. The message lays out a clear breach of contract. God basically says, hey, I kept my side of the internal covenant by bringing you out of Egypt, but you all compromised on your end.
And what exactly was the specific indictment there?
The specific charge is that they made alliances with the inhabitants of the land, and they explicitly failed to tear down the pagan altars.
Ah, right. So they chose coexistence and assimilation over the distinct identity they were commanded to maintain.
Exactly.
Which carries a devastating consequence.
Yeah.
Based on the notes, God essentially tells them that the divine protection is being rescinded.
Yeah. He declares he's no longer going to drive out their enemies.
Right. Instead, these surrounding nations and their foreign gods are going to become a permanent snare, just a trap.
The total trap.
And I want to look at the human psychology of how the people react to this news because, the text says their reaction is immediate and very visceral.
Oh, yeah. They completely break down.
Right. They lift up their voices, they weep loudly, and they offer sacrifices right then and there. The place is literally named Bochim, which translates to weepers.
Weepers, yeah.
But looking at human nature, I have to be honest, I am highly skeptical of these tears.
Oh, you and the scholars both.
This feels less like a profound spiritual awakening and way more like, a teenager weeping because their parents just took the car keys away.
Yes, exactly.
I just keep wondering, are they weeping because they actually understand the weight of their compromise? Or are they just crying because the consequences of getting caught are finally hitting them?
Well, the Holman notes validate that exact skepticism.
Don't they really?
Yeah, the sources cast serious doubt on the authenticity of their repentance here. They exhibit all the outward performative signs of grief.
The loud crying, the immediate sacrifices.
Right, but it is entirely superficial. We know this wasn't genuine repentance because of what happens literally right after.
Oh, right. They go right back to it.
Almost immediately after this big emotional display, they fall right back into the very idolatry they were just weeping over.
Wow. So it's just a classic psychological defense mechanism.
Yep. Performative grief designed to deflect immediate punishment without, any internal commitment to actual behavioral change.
The tears dry, and the behavior remains identical,
Hmm.
which forces us to look at the root cause here.
Why they compromised in the first place.
Exactly. When you read the preceding history of this nation, they were led by people who witnessed undeniable, physics-defying miracles.
Right, the splitting of the sea, the plagues.
Yeah. So to go from that level of a historical anchor to total assimilation, it requires a massive breakdown in communications somewhere.
It was a catastrophic generational disconnect. The texts outline the passing of the old guard, specifically focusing on Joshua, the great leader who brought them into the land.
Oh, yeah, Joshua.
He dies at the age of 110 and is buried in his inheritance at Timnath-Heres, up in the rugged hill country of Ephraim.
And with his death, and the subsequent death of that entire generation of elders, the centralizing force of their society basically just vanishes.
It does. That transition is where the floor completely falls out.
Yeah, the NDVA notes highlight this really tragic single sentence that kind of defines the whole era. It says an entire generation dies, and the new generation that rises up, quote, did not know the Lord or the works he had done for Israel.
Which is it's a staggering thing to read.
It is terrifying.
Yeah.
It is the equivalent of deleting a nation's cultural hard drive overnight.
Right.
But, I mean, memory loss on a societal scale doesn't just happen by accident,
No, it represents an active failure. It's a failure of the older generation to transmit their history and a failure of the younger generation to internalize it.
And without that active, intentional transmission of history, this new generation was just a blank slate.
Exactly. You really have to remember the environment they were in, too. They were no longer nomadic wanderers.
All right, they were a newly settled people.
Yes, surrounded by deeply entrenched ancient cultures. And because their own historical memory wasn't preserved within them, they had no internal counter-narrative to push back against the dominant culture.
They were entirely vulnerable to whatever belief systems were operating right next door.
Completely vulnerable.
And nature abhors a vacuum. When that cultural hard drive is wiped, a society doesn't just sit around believing in nothing.
Right. They look at their immediate environment and figure out how to survive.
Yeah. Because they are this blank slate in a new agrarian environment, they naturally seek out systems that promise practical results for their daily lives.
The text points out exactly who the Israelites started worshiping too, which is Baal and Ashtaroth.
Right. And the source definitions for these deities are vital to understanding the mechanics of this shift. It wasn't just some arbitrary rebellion.
No, not at all. Baal was the Canaanite god of the storm and rain. And Ashtaroth, which is the plural form of Astarte, was his consort, the goddess of love, war, and fertility.
So if we put ourselves in their shoes for a second, the logic actually becomes pretty clear.
It makes a lot of sense geographically.
Yeah, think about the geography. When they were in Egypt, agriculture relied on the Nile River, right? A super consistent, predictable water source.
Right, you always had water.
But in Canaan, agriculture is entirely dependent on rainfall. If it doesn't rain, you starve. Period.
It's life or death.
So, for a newly settled farming society, worshiping a storm god and a fertility goddess probably didn't feel like some sinister betrayal of their ancestors.
No, it probably felt like a practical prerequisite for agricultural success.
Right. It was just a localized economic strategy.
It was pure pragmatism. The logic was basically, hey, if you want your crops to grow in this specific land, you appease the god who controls the rain in this specific land.
Makes sense on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. However, the NWA notes really highlight how the biblical writers viewed this pragmatic shift. The text describes their actions as, quote, prostituting themselves.
Wow. That's intense language.
It is. It introduces this really powerful metaphor of spiritual adultery, a concept that becomes totally foundational for later prophets, like Ezekiel and Hosea.
And that metaphor fundamentally changes how we view their actions. It means they traded a deeply committed covenantal marriage for a purely transactional relationship.
Right. They reduce the divine to a vending machine.
Yes. Like, if we pay the storm god with a sacrifice, we get rain for our crops. It's an economic transaction devoid of any relational intimacy or moral obligation.
And that pragmatic betrayal is what provokes divine anger.
Because it's a betrayal of the marriage.
Exactly. The sources note that as a direct result of this broken covenant, the protection is lifted. The Israelites are literally handed over to plunderers and surrounding enemies.
Because they chose the gods of the surrounding nations, they are left to the mercy of those same nations.
Right. which triggers the defining mechanism of this entire era.
For a vicious cycle.
Yes, the vicious cycle. We really should unpack the mechanics of this cycle because it dictates the rhythm of the entire book of Judges.
So the NWA notes broke this cycle down into a very clear repeating pattern.
Right. It starts with apostasy.
Which is the people turning away to foreign gods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This leads to the second phase, divine wrath and oppression, where God basically allows foreign invaders to conquer and subjugate them.
And then, under the crushing weight of this oppression, the people enter the third phase. They begin groaning and crying out.
Right. And in response, moved by pity and grace, God raises up a judge to deliver them.
So the land experiences peace as long as that judge is alive.
But the moment the judge dies, there is a total relapse.
I want to pause on that groaning phase for a second.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting.
Why do they groan to God instead of just doubling down on Baal? If we follow the logic of their pragmatism, Baal is the god of rain and crops.
Right.
But he's not a god of historical deliverance. When foreign armies are burning your villages, a rain god is utterly useless.
Yeah, you don't need rain, you need an army.
Exactly. They only cry out to the god of their ancestors when they need the god of battles, the god who defeated the Egyptian empire.
That is such a crucial distinction. Their groaning is born out of military desperation, not theological devotion.
Right.
And this brings us to the nature of the deliverers God actually sends them.
Yeah, because this audience knows ancient history. We know these weren't, men in black robes sitting behind mahogany benches settling contract disputes.
No, not at all.
But looking at the historical map provided in the sources really visualizes the sheer chaos of their role. This cycle wasn't happening in a centralized capital like Rome.
Right, it was completely
It
fractured.
was a decentralized tribal crisis. The map shows these judges just popping up across totally isolated territories.
Yeah, you have Othniel operating way down south in the territory of Judah,
And you have Deborah mobilizing forces in the central hills of Ephraim.
and Samson waging basically a one-man guerrilla war near the coast in Dan.
The geography on that map is essential. The Israelites were largely confined to the hill country because the Canaanites controlled the valleys with their iron chariots.
Right. And this geographical isolation prevented any unified military front.
So there was no standing army.
No standing army, no central government. So these judges were charismatic regional warlords raised up for highly localized crises.
Just desperate military liberators springing up in a fractured system.
Exactly. But the truly chilling detail about this era, and the Holman notes emphasize this heavily, is that this cycle is not just a repeating circle.
Right is worse than that.
It is a downward spiral. It operates way more like a tornado, pulling the society deeper into the ground with every single rotation.
The text is so explicit about this downward trajectory. God raises these leaders out of compassion for their suffering, but each subsequent generation becomes more corrupt than their ancestors.
Yeah, the deliverance never leads to lasting reformation.
No, it merely resets the clock.
Yeah.
And when they relapse, they plunge into a deeper moral decay than the generation before them.
And the judges themselves reflect this decay, you know.
Totally.
The early judges are relatively noble, but by the time you reach the end of the era, the judges are deeply flawed, violent, and morally compromised individuals.
So if the spiral keeps going down, eventually it hits bedrock.
Right, it has to.
A breaking point just has to be reached in how the divine interacts with a nation that refuses to maintain its identity.
And that breaking point is marked by a fascinating and honestly devastating linguistic shift detailed in the NWA notes.
Yeah, this part is wild.
Up to this point, despite all their flaws, God refers to Israel using intimate covenantal language. He calls them my people. But as the downward spiral deepens and the covenant is continually trampled, God's language shifts. He stops referring to them intimately and starts calling them this nation.
And the Hebrew word used there is goy, isn't it?
Yes. And in the context of the biblical writers, goy is a term strictly reserved for pagan foreign nations.
Right.
To apply it to Israel is a shocking linguistic reversal.
Just think about the emotional weight of that shift.
Yeah.
Think about having a deep, intimate history with someone who always calls you by, like, an affectionate nickname.
Yeah.
Then one day you push them too far, and they suddenly address you by your formal legal name.
Ouch. Yeah.
It instantly communicates a severe loss of intimacy. It establishes a profound, almost unbridgeable relational distance.
By calling them goy, God is essentially saying, oh, you wanted to act like the surrounding nations. Fine, now you are one of them.
And the consequence of that relational distance alters their history permanently. Because they have become indistinguishable from the Canaanites, God decrees that the remaining enemy nations, the ones Joshua left behind, will not be driven out.
Right, ever.
Instead, they will remain permanently in the land to test Israel.
Yeah, they serve as a constant pressure to see whether the Israelites will walk in the way of the Lord or just continue to assimilate.
The environment of compromise they chose becomes their permanent reality. The training wheels are taken off, and they are left to navigate the very traps they refuse to dismantle.
It is a heavy, heavy place to land.
It really is, but it brings us full circle to the brilliance of these ancient texts. I mean, they aren't just recording history. They were exposing the very mechanics of human nature.
Absolutely.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to really explore on your own. The sources state that those lingering enemy nations, those cultural snares, were left behind specifically to test the new generation.
Yeah.
It really forces you to look at the world around you today. How many of the persistent struggles, the intense cultural battles, or the deep-seated issues we face right now are actually just tests left behind by previous generations?
Wow, that's a great question.
Tests left to see what we will choose, and whether we will actually do the hard work of remembering our foundational identity, or simply drift into whatever belief system is most convenient for our immediate survival.
Definitely something to chew on.
Well, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive into the sources. Thank you so much for joining us and exploring the mechanics of this ancient cycle.
Thanks for having me.
As we sign off, I want to officially say goodbye by declaring that God blesses all of you, our listeners. Have a wonderful week, and we will catch you next time.